The sound of the tires crunching over the gravel road echoed in my head, a rhythmic pulse that matched my uneasy heartbeat. I had never been one for the outdoors. Too many bugs, too much uncertainty. But this time, I convinced myself that a weekend in a secluded cabin would be the break I needed. No distractions, no noise, just peace. That's what I told myself anyway. The road twisted and turned through dense woods, the trees towering over me like silent giants. Every mile felt like it stretched on for an eternity, and as the road became narrower, the feeling in my stomach grew heavier. I wasn't sure if it was fear or just a natural unease about being so far from anything familiar. But when the GPS cut out and I could no longer see the familiar markers of civilization, the feeling became something else entirely. Something worse. There was no turning back now. I finally made it to the cabin. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the peaceful, calming kind, but the kind that made your skin prickle. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath. The trees around the cabin seemed almost too still. No birds chirped, no wind rustled the leaves, just silence. I parked the car, grabbed my bags, and made my way toward the cabin. It wasn't much, a small, one-story wooden structure with peeling paint and a sagging roof. The windows were dark, reflecting the dull gray sky overhead. But it was mine for the weekend, and it seemed like the perfect escape. The front door creaked open easily, the old hinges protesting the movement. Inside was as I expected, dusty, with old furniture covered in thick sheets. A fireplace sat in the corner, and a small kitchen area was tucked into the far side. The bedroom was small, with a bed that looked too soft to sleep on. I walked around, exploring the place. The cabin smelled of mildew and aged wood. The furniture had that musty, forgotten feel to it, as if no one had stepped foot inside for years. But there was a strange comfort in that. No one would bother me here. I decided to start a fire. The air had grown colder, and I figured the warmth would help set the mood. I opened the fireplace and gathered some wood, striking a match to light it. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The sound was soothing, almost hypnotic. That was when I heard it. A soft sound, almost like a rustling, a slight movement outside. I froze, listening intently, but the noise stopped as soon as I focused on it. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer wandering too close. I laughed it off, taking a deep breath and letting my tension go. But as the night wore on, the feeling of being watched only grew. I couldn't shake the sensation that something or someone was out there. I tried to distract myself with a book, but every time I looked up, the feeling intensified. The cabin felt more like a trap than a sanctuary. The walls felt too close, the windows too open. I decided to go to bed early. Maybe sleep would calm my nerves. The bed wasn't great. Old sheets, a lumpy mattress, but it was better than sleeping on the floor. I pulled the covers up, trying to ignore the unease that still clung to me. But sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the wind outside seemed to amplify in the stillness. I kept my eyes open, staring into the dark corners of the room. Then I heard it again. This time it wasn't a rustling. It was a knock. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The knock was soft, deliberate, coming from the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I didn't even know if anyone lived nearby. It wasn't like there were any neighbors, and I hadn't seen a car for miles. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, debating whether I should check or ignore it. But the longer I stayed still, the louder my pulse became. My breath quickened, my hands growing cold as I reached for the flashlight on the bedside table. I couldn't stay in bed while someone was outside. I couldn't just pretend nothing was happening. With slow, careful movements, I got out of bed and made my way to the door. Every step felt like it echoed through the cabin, too loud in the silence. The knock came again. Tap, tap, tap. I stopped in front of the door, flashlight in hand. My mind raced. Who could it be? And why would anyone be out here, in the middle of nowhere, knocking on my door in the middle of the night? I turned the handle and slowly opened the door, the hinges creaking loudly in the still air. The flashlight's beam cut through the dark, sweeping across the porch. But there was nothing there. just the empty wilderness stretching out into the distance. Relief flooded through me. It was nothing, just a figment of my imagination, or maybe some animal messing with me. I closed the door quickly, locking it, and turned to go back inside. Then I noticed something. There were footprints on the porch. They weren't mine. They were fresh, and they led from the edge of the porch to the door. Big, heavy prints like someone had stood there, waiting. I swallowed hard, the pit in my stomach growing. I stood there for a moment, staring at the footprints, my mind racing. Could it have been someone from the nearby town? A hunter, maybe? Or had I been too naive, thinking I could just escape the world by coming out here? Whoever it was, they had been on the porch for a while. I locked the door again, bolted it this time, and turned off the lights. I wasn't going to sleep. Not now. I didn't trust myself to be alone in the dark anymore. Hours passed, and I tried to stay calm, but the silence was suffocating. Every little sound outside seemed amplified. I held my breath every time I thought I heard a rustle or a crack of a branch. I didn't dare open the window, not even to see if the footprints were still there. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart thudding in my chest. But eventually I fell asleep. Morning came. First, everything seemed normal. The sun was up, the cabin was still, and the only sound was the wind gently moving through the trees. I checked the porch. The footprints were still there. I didn't know what to think. Had I imagined it? Maybe I had been too tired, too paranoid. But the prints were too clear to ignore. I spent the day wandering the woods, trying to distract myself. The forest was dense and unfamiliar. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was being pulled into something that didn't want me there. The silence followed me, clinging to every step. But I didn't go far. The thought of someone watching me kept gnawing at the back of my mind. Whoever had been out there last night wasn't gone, and they were still somewhere in those trees. By the time the sun began to dip, I made the decision to leave. I packed up my things quickly, my hands trembling. As I reached the door, I noticed something on the floor inside, a small, folded piece of paper. I didn't want to open it, but I couldn't help myself. I unfolded the paper, my eyes scanning the words quickly. You shouldn't have come here. You're not alone. My breath caught in my throat. The cabin wasn't just an isolated place. It was their place. Whoever had left that message, whoever had knocked on the door, they had been watching me. I ran. I didn't care about anything else. I grabbed my keys, jumped in my truck, and drove as fast as I could, not looking back. To this day, I don't know who was watching me or why they were there, but I never went back to that cabin, and I never will. I needed to get away. Life had been too much lately. Constant emails, phone calls, and an overwhelming sense of burnout. I didn't want a vacation in a crowded place, didn't want to see people at all. I just wanted to be alone, to breathe. That's why I booked the cabin. It was a last-minute rental, something I found on an obscure website. The listing didn't have many pictures, just a brief description. Secluded cabin deep in the forest. No neighbors, no distractions. That's exactly what I wanted. The owner didn't ask many questions, just gave me the key code, an old-fashioned map, and a warning, no cell service, no Wi-Fi. Perfect. Or at least that's what I thought. The road stretched endlessly into the woods. No houses, no other cars, just trees on either side pressing in close. The deeper I went, the rougher the road became. Dirt and gravel, littered with potholes. My GPS cut out about an hour in. No signal. I wasn't worried. I had the map and the directions were simple. Follow the main dirt road for 10 miles, then take a right at the old hunting sign. I found the sign easily. Faded, wooden, barely standing. I turned onto a narrower road, the trees closing in even tighter. 15 minutes later, I saw the cabin. It sat in a small clearing, old but sturdy, its dark wooden walls blending into the forest. A tiny porch wrapped around the front, and a rusted metal chimney stuck out from the roof. I parked the truck and sat for a moment, taking in the silence. No wind, no birds, just stillness. I stepped out, stretching, breathing in the cold, damp air. The ground was soft beneath my boots, covered in fallen leaves and pine needles. I grabbed my bags and headed up the steps. The wooden planks creaked under my weight. The key code worked, and the door swung open with a low groan. Inside, it was simple: one main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen area, a single bed, and a door leading to a tiny bathroom. Dust floated in the air, catching the last light of the setting sun. I locked the door behind me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. But I should have listened to that first feeling of unease. I woke up to a sound, a soft crunching outside. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I listened, my stomach tightened. It was deliberate, slow, footsteps. I sat up, every nerve in my body alert. The fire had burned low, casting weak shadows across the walls. I reached for my flashlight and shined it toward the window. Nothing, just darkness. I waited, heart pounding. Then, after what felt like forever, the sound faded. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer, maybe a raccoon, but I didn't sleep well after that. Morning came gray and cold. I stepped outside, stretching, shaking off the lingering unease from the night before. Then I saw them, footprints, not mine, fresh. They circled the cabin, stopping at the window. My skin prickled. I scanned the tree line, my heart pounding. The woods were silent, too silent. I told myself it was just a lost hiker, but deep down I knew better. Someone had been here, watching. I spent the day on edge, checking the perimeter, making sure the door was locked, the windows secured. As the sun started setting, my nerves were shot. I built up the fire, locked myself inside, and sat with my back against the wall, facing the window. I wasn't going to let my guard down again. I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. The creak of the wooden walls, the distant rustling in the trees. Then, the sound of footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath. Then the door handle twisted. A slow testing turn. Locked. The handle stopped moving. Silence. Then the footsteps retreated. I stayed frozen, knife in hand, listening as the sounds disappeared into the woods. Whoever it was, they were gone. For now. The first light, I packed my things. I wasn't staying another night. As I loaded my bag into the truck, I saw something on the porch. Pile of rocks, stacked neatly, like a message or a warning. A chill ran down my spine. I climbed into the truck, started the engine, and hit the gas. I didn't look back. The road felt longer. The trees seemed closer. Every shadow between the trunks looked like a figure. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone standing there. But there was nothing, just empty woods. By the time I reached the highway, my hands were shaking. I drove straight home. I never told anyone what happened. I never went back. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up to a sound outside my window. A slow, deliberate footstep. I don't look. I don't want to know. I don't know why I ignored my instincts. I think about that a lot. How many chances I had to leave, how many warning signs I brushed off. But I was stubborn, and I had convinced myself that I needed this trip. I had been burnt out for months. Work, relationships, city life. It all felt like too much. I needed to get away from people, from noise, from stress. So, I booked a cabin deep in the woods, a place where I could be alone and reset my mind. It was a small, old structure, tucked away in the mountains, miles from the nearest town. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, no neighbors. Exactly what I wanted. Or at least that's what I thought. I left early in the morning, expecting to arrive by midday. The drive started off fine. Highways, small roads, scenic forests. But as I got deeper into the mountains, the roads became narrower, rougher. My GPS cut out about an hour from the cabin, leaving me with only the printed directions from the owner. Turn onto the dirt road after the wooden bridge. I almost missed it. The road was barely visible, overgrown with weeds, like it hadn't been used in years. My tires crunched over loose gravel and dried leaves as I turned onto it. The deeper I went, the worse the road got. Potholes, fallen branches, deep ruts that made my truck jolt violently. The trees pressed in closer, their shadows making the midday light feel like early evening. Then, I saw something strange. Off to the right, deep in the trees, was an old, rusted-out car. The windows were shattered, the doors hanging open like a long-forgotten accident. The forest had started reclaiming it. Vines curling through the broken glass, moss covering the metal. I should have turned around, but I kept going. The cabin was smaller than I expected. A single-story wooden structure with a tin roof and a small porch. It looked abandoned. Peeling paint, warped wood, a single window covered in grime. I parked and got out, stretching after the long drive. The silence was unsettling. No wind, no birds, no rustling leaves. Just dead, heavy quiet. I grabbed my bag, walked up to the door, and punched in the lockbox code. The key was cold in my hand. Inside, the cabin smelled like old wood and dust. The furniture was basic, just a table, a few chairs, a couch that looked decades old. There was a fireplace, a tiny kitchen, and a single bedroom in the back. I checked my phone. No service. I wasn't surprised, but it still made me uneasy. I told myself it was fine. This is what I wanted. I unpacked, started a fire, and tried to relax. I woke up suddenly. First, I wasn't sure why. Then I heard it. Soft footsteps outside. Slow, careful. I held my breath, straining to listen. The fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the cabin walls. The footsteps stopped. I turned my head toward the window. My own reflection stared back at me in the glass. I waited. Nothing. Minutes passed. Finally, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Maybe an animal. A deer. I lay back down, but it took a long time to fall asleep. The next morning, I stepped outside, stretching in the cold morning air. Then I saw them. Footprints. Human footprints. They started at the edge of the tree line and led toward the cabin. They stopped right outside my window. My stomach dropped. I scanned the woods, heart pounding. There was no one there. No cars, no houses, no trails. Just endless trees. I told myself it had to be an old print. Maybe from the cabin's owner. Maybe a hiker who had passed through long ago. But deep down, I didn't believe that. I spent the day trying to shake off the unease. I gathered firewood, walked a little, tried to clear my head. But the entire time, I felt like I was being watched. By afternoon, I had made up my mind. If anything else weird happened, I was leaving. I barely slept. Every sound made my pulse spike. The creak of the old cabin walls, the wind whispering through the trees. Then, just after midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps, right outside the door. Slow, deliberate. Then the door handle twisted. I sat up, heart hammering. The door was locked. The handle rattled again, harder this time. I grabbed my knife, gripping it so tightly my hand ached. Then silence. I didn't move, didn't breathe. After what felt like hours, I heard the footsteps retreat. Whoever it was, they were leaving, or so I thought. The moment the sun rose, I packed my things. I didn't care if I had rented the cabin for the whole week. I wasn't staying another night. I threw my bag into the truck, turned the key, and the engine wouldn't start. My stomach twisted. I tried again. Nothing. I popped the hood, stepping out quickly. That's when I saw it. The engine had been tampered with. Wires were cut. Someone had done this while I was inside. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my knife, scanning the woods. The footprints from the night before were still visible in the dirt, leading back toward the trees. I had two choices: stay in the cabin and hope for help, or start walking. I chose to walk. I grabbed my bag, stuffed it with essentials, and started down the dirt road. I walked fast, my pulse hammering in my ears. Every few minutes, I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone behind me. Hours passed. Then I saw the rusted-out car again, and something new. A figure in the distance, standing in the trees, not moving, just watching. I didn't stop. I didn't run. I just kept walking, my knife gripped in my hand. Finally, I reached the main road. I had never felt more relieved in my life. A truck passed by not long after, an old man behind the wheel. He pulled over, asked if I needed help. I told him my car had broken down, that I needed to get back to town. He nodded slowly, then said something that chilled me to the bone. "You're lucky, son. Ain't nobody lives up there anymore." I didn't ask what he meant. I just got in the truck, and I never looked back. I never went back to that cabin. Never tried to figure out who had been watching me, who had tampered with my truck. I didn't want to know, but sometimes late at night I think about that figure in the woods, standing there, watching, waiting, and I wonder how close they really got. I didn't set out to scare myself. I wasn't looking for danger or some thrilling experience to tell people about later. I just wanted peace. A weekend alone, away from the city, away from people, away from everything. That was the plan. Jeremy, an old friend from college, had offered me his family's cabin. "It's nothing fancy," he had said, "but it's quiet." That was all I needed to hear. I packed light, some clothes, food, a flashlight, a hunting knife, and a book I had been meaning to read for months. The cabin was deep in the woods, about 3 hours from the nearest town, but I didn't mind. In fact, that was the appeal. I left on a Friday morning, figuring I'd get there by early afternoon. The first 2 hours of the drive were easy, smooth highways, a few stops for coffee. But then the roads narrowed, turning from pavement to dirt, and the trees began to close in. I checked the GPS, but the signal had dropped. Jeremy had warned me that cell service was spotty at best. "Once you're past the last gas station," he'd said, "you're on your own." I wasn't worried. I had the directions printed out. The last stretch of road was rough, just a winding dirt path barely wide enough for my car. The further I went, the darker the woods became. The trees were tall and close together, their branches twisting overhead like fingers locking together. The sky, which had been clear earlier, was now a dull gray. Then I saw it, the cabin. It was small, made of dark wood, with a slanted roof and a wraparound porch. A stack of firewood sat beside the front door, and a single rocking chair creaked in the breeze. The windows were dark. The place looked untouched, like no one had been there in months. I parked, grabbed my bag, and stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned under my weight. I found the key under the loose brick, just as Jeremy had said, and let myself in. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of old wood and dust. The cabin was simple: a single open room with a fireplace, a small kitchenette, and a door leading to the bedroom in the back. The furniture was old but solid. A hunting rifle hung on the wall above the fireplace. There were a few books on a shelf, mostly about survival and hunting. I set my bag down and went to open the windows, letting in some fresh air. Outside, the forest was silent. Not just quiet, silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, no distant hum of insects. Just nothing. I shook it off. Probably just my imagination. I spent the rest of the afternoon settling in. I checked the generator, filled the lanterns with oil, and chopped some wood for the fireplace. By the time the sun started to set, I had a fire going and a can of soup heating on the stove. That's when I heard it. A soft, steady tapping. I froze, listening. It wasn't coming from inside. It was coming from the woods. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too steady. I stood, heart pounding, and walked to the window. The trees swayed slightly in the breeze, but nothing looked out of place. The tapping had stopped. I shook my head, trying to laugh it off. "Just a branch," I muttered under my breath. I sat back down, ate my soup, and tried to focus on my book. But every so often, I found myself glancing toward the window, expecting to see something staring back. By the time I went to bed, I had convinced myself it was nothing. The woods were full of sounds. I was just on edge because I wasn't used to being alone like this. But then, around midnight, I woke up. Something had woken me. I lay still, listening. The fire had died down to embers, casting faint shadows on the walls. The cabin was silent, but outside, footsteps. Slow, careful footsteps moving around the cabin. I held my breath. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was walking just outside. I reached for the hunting knife I had left on the bedside table, gripping it tight. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The footsteps stopped. Then, a sound that sent a cold wave of fear through me. The doorknob rattled. I shot up, knife in hand, and moved silently toward the door. The lock held, but whoever was out there wasn't in a hurry. They tested the handle again, slow and deliberate, as if they had all the time in the world. Then, nothing. I waited, knife raised, every muscle tense. The silence stretched on. Minutes passed. My breathing was shallow, controlled. Finally, after what felt like forever, I heard footsteps again, moving away this time. I stayed up the rest of the night, gripping the knife, my back against the wall, watching the door. Morning came slow. The sunlight felt unreal, like I had spent the night in some other world and was only just now returning. I stepped onto the porch, my body aching from tension. There were footprints in the dirt. Not boots, not shoes, bare feet. The prints led from the treeline to the porch, circled the cabin, and then disappeared back into the woods. A cold, sick feeling settled in my stomach. I wanted to leave. I should have left. But I told myself it was just some lunatic passing through. Maybe a hunter. Maybe some local who had too much to drink. They were gone now. I stayed. That night, the tapping returned. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then, a whisper. Not words. Not a voice. Just the faintest sound of breath against the cabin wall. I slept with the knife in my hand, never truly closing my eyes. By the third day, I was losing it. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't slept. Every sound put me on edge. Every shadow felt wrong. I decided to leave at first light. But when I went to my car, the tires were slashed. Panic set in. I had no way out. No cell service. No radio. No weapons except the knife and the rifle above the fireplace. I locked every door and window, stoked the fire, and waited. Night fell, and the footsteps returned. They circled the cabin slowly, deliberately. The doorknob rattled. Then, a new sound, scraping, a slow, dragging scrape along the wooden walls, moving around the cabin. I clutched the rifle, heart hammering. Then silence. I stayed awake all night, waiting. At sunrise, I ran. I didn't care about the car. I didn't care about my stuff. I grabbed the knife, a bottle of water, and ran straight into the woods. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I ran until I hit a dirt road, and by some miracle, a truck appeared in the distance. I waved my arms, screaming. The driver, a local, took one look at me and let me in. I never told him what happened. I never told Jeremy either. I never went back for my car. Never asked what happened to the cabin. Some places aren't meant to be visited. Some places aren't empty, and some things don't want you to leave. I needed a break. Life had been stressful. Work was eating away at me. My phone never stopped buzzing, and the city was suffocating. So, I decided to rent a remote cabin for a week. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just me and the quiet. I found a listing online for a small cabin deep in the woods, miles from any town. It was exactly what I wanted. The description was simple. 1 bedroom, a fireplace, a small kitchen, and a porch that overlooked a quiet lake. It was completely isolated. Perfect, or so I thought. The drive took longer than I expected. The last stretch was on a dirt road that barely looked like a road at all. The further I went, the narrower it got. Trees loomed over both sides, branches scratching at my truck. No street signs, no tire tracks. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. I checked the GPS. Still on the right path. The cabin was close. Finally, I saw it. A small wooden structure tucked between the trees. It looked old but sturdy. A single window faced the road, and a wooden porch wrapped around the front. Smoke curled from the chimney. The rental company must have sent someone ahead to warm the place up. I pulled up, killed the engine and sat there for a moment. The silence was heavy, pressing against my ears. No birds, no wind, just stillness. Something about it made my skin prickle, but I shook it off, grabbed my bag, and headed inside. Inside, the cabin was exactly as described. Small but comfortable. A fireplace crackled in the corner, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. A single bed was against the far wall, covered in thick blankets. There was a small table with 2 chairs, a kitchenette, and a door leading to a tiny bathroom. Everything smelled like old wood and smoke. I dropped my bag and sat by the fire, stretching my legs. The warmth was comforting. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced at the window. The glass was dark, reflecting only the flickering firelight. Outside was nothing but blackness. I locked the door. I woke up to a noise, a soft tapping. My eyes snapped open. The fire had burned low, casting weak shadows across the cabin. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window. My heart pounded. I lay still, barely breathing. Then silence. The tapping stopped. I turned my head slowly, staring at the window. Nothing, just darkness. I listened. Nothing. I told myself it was a branch, maybe an animal. The woods were full of strange sounds, but I kept my knife close as I pulled the blankets tighter around me. Sleep didn't come easy after that. Morning came cold and gray. I stepped outside, stretching, shaking off the uneasy feeling from the night before. Then I saw them. Footprints, not mine, leading from the treeline to the cabin, stopping right below the window. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The ground was damp from last night's rain. The prints were fresh. Someone had been here, watching. I scanned the trees, searching for movement. Nothing. A deep part of me told me to leave, get in the truck and go. But I had driven hours to get here. It was probably just a lost hiker. Still, I spent the day on edge. I checked the door, the locks, even searched the cabin for anything unusual. Nothing was missing. Nothing was moved. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I locked the door, built up the fire, and sat with my back against the wall, facing the window. I wasn't going to sleep easily. The fire crackled, filling the cabin with warmth. I sat there for hours listening, waiting. Then, a noise outside. Slow, deliberate. Footsteps. They moved around the cabin, crunching over dead leaves. I gripped my knife, every muscle tensed. The footsteps stopped at the porch. Silence. Then, the door handle rattled. I held my breath, heart pounding. The handle turned, locked. A pause. Then, the slow, shuffling footsteps moved away. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Minutes passed. An hour. Finally, I let out a shaky breath. Whoever it was, they were gone. For now. The first light, I packed my things. I wasn't staying another night. As I loaded my bag into the truck, I glanced at the porch. Something was sitting there. A small bundle of twigs, tied together with a piece of dirty cloth, shaped like a human figure. A warning. My hands shook as I grabbed my keys. I climbed into the truck, started the engine, and sped down the dirt road, tires skidding over loose gravel. I didn't look back. The drive felt longer. The trees pressed in, the road twisting and narrow. I kept glancing in the mirror, expecting to see something behind me. Someone. But there was nothing. Just empty road and endless trees. When I finally reached the highway, I exhaled, my muscles unclenching for the first time in hours. I didn't stop until I was miles away. Back home, I couldn't shake the feeling. The unease, the fear. I looked up the listing again. It was gone. Removed. Like it had never existed. I don't know who was out there that night. I don't know what they wanted. But I know one thing. I was never alone. I needed to get away. Work had been exhausting, and city life was wearing me down. I wanted silence. Real silence. No cars, no voices, no deadlines. Just me, the trees, and the sound of the wind. So I rented a cabin deep in the mountains. It wasn't a resort-style lodge with running water and Wi-Fi. It was an old, single-room structure, No electricity, no cell service. The kind of place you'd only find if you already knew where to look. That's exactly what I wanted. A week alone in the woods. It should have been perfect. The drive took most of the day. The last hour was on a dirt road so narrow that my truck barely fit between the trees. Branches scraped against the sides, and deep potholes made the tires bounce. I hadn't seen another car in hours. No signs, no markers, just my GPS leading me into the deep woods. When I finally saw the cabin, I exhaled in relief. It was small, made of dark wood, with a single window on the front. A narrow porch wrapped around the side, and a metal chimney stuck out from the roof. The trees pressed in around it, towering and dense. It looked even older than I expected, but it would do. I parked, grabbed my bags, and walked up to the porch. The wooden steps creaked under my weight. The door was unlocked. Inside, it was simple. One main room with a fireplace, a small wooden table, a single bed against the far wall. A shelf held some old cans of food, and a pile of firewood was stacked near the door. It smelled like dust and dry wood. I dropped my bag on the bed and stretched. Finally, peace. But as I stood there, something felt off. The air was too still. The cabin was silent. No birds outside, no wind. Just silence pressing in from all sides. I brushed it off. I was overthinking it. I locked the door, lit a fire, and settled in. The fire crackled, filling the cabin with warmth. I ate a quick meal, then lay on the bed, staring at the wooden ceiling. That's when I heard it. A noise outside, faint, distant, like footsteps crunching through the leaves. I held my breath, listening. Nothing, just my imagination. I rolled over and closed my eyes. Then, a creak, closer this time, like a footstep on the porch. I sat up, heart pounding. I waited, listening. Silence. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it at the window. The glass was dirty, but I could see the porch clearly. Empty. I told myself it was just the old wood shifting in the cold night air. But I kept my knife close as I lay back down. Morning came slow. I barely slept. I stepped outside, stretching, shaking off the uneasy feeling from the night before. Then I saw them. Footprints. Not mine. Fresh. They circled the cabin, stopping at the window. A cold wave washed over me. Someone had been out here, watching. I scanned the trees, heart pounding. Nothing moved. I considered leaving, packing up and driving back down the mountain. But I had driven hours to get here, and I told myself it was probably just a lost hiker. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I spent the day exploring, trying to enjoy the fresh air, the quiet. I chopped wood, hiked a bit, did anything to keep my mind occupied. By the time I got back, the sun was already setting. I locked the door, built up the fire, and sat with my back against the wall, watching the window. I wasn't going to sleep easily tonight. The wind had picked up, whistling through the trees. The firelight flickered against the walls. Then, a sound, a slow, dragging sound, right outside the cabin. My breath caught. It wasn't an animal. Animals move quickly, darting through the brush. This was different, deliberate. I grabbed my knife and flashlight, every muscle tensed. Then something scraped against the door. A long, slow scratch like nails against wood. My heart pounded. I aimed the flashlight at the window. Nothing. The scratching stopped. The wind howled outside, but the night was still. I sat there, gripping the knife, waiting. Nothing. After what felt like hours, I finally lay down. But I didn't sleep. At first light, I opened the door slowly, knife in hand. Something was on the porch. A bundle of sticks, tied together with twine, shaped like a small human figure. I stared at it, stomach twisting. Someone put this here. Someone was messing with me. I grabbed my gear, threw it into my truck, and started the engine. The tires spun on the dirt before catching. As I pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him, a figure standing at the tree line, watching. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I drove until the cabin was nothing but a memory in the mirror. I don't know who he was. I don't know what he wanted. But I know one thing. I was never alone. I should have listened to my gut. The trip had been planned for weeks. Just me, some time away from work, and a cabin in the middle of nowhere. The idea sounded good at first. No emails, no meetings, no noise, just silence and space. But the moment I started driving, something felt off. It was late October, the days growing shorter, the air carrying that early bite of winter. The cabin was up in northern Montana, miles from the nearest town. I followed the directions carefully. Highways turned to smaller roads, then to dirt paths that barely looked like they belonged on a map. The deeper I went, the worse the roads got. My truck rattled over rocks and dips in the path, the trees pressing in on both sides. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun had almost set. It was smaller than I expected, just a simple wooden structure, darkened by age, sitting alone in a clearing. The roof was steep, the front porch sagging slightly. A single window faced the driveway, but the inside was too dark to see anything. The air was heavy, the kind of quiet that didn't feel right. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The feeling in my gut hadn't gone away. If anything, it was worse now, but there was no turning back. I was here for the weekend. I grabbed my bag and stepped out. The gravel crunched under my boots. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and damp wood. The cabin door was unlocked. That was the first thing that made me pause. I remembered the booking site specifically saying the key would be under the mat. But when I lifted it, there was nothing there. I pushed the door open. Inside, the air smelled stale, like it hadn't been lived in for a long time. The furniture was old but sturdy. A small wooden table, a couch with worn cushions, a stone fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Dust clung to the corners. The kitchen was just a few steps away, tiny and basic. A single hallway led to the bedroom and bathroom. I set my bag down and checked my phone. No service, no Wi-Fi. I expected that, but it still unsettled me. Something about the cabin felt wrong. I told myself I was being paranoid. I unpacked, lit the fireplace, and made a simple dinner from the supplies I brought. The crackling fire made the place feel less empty, but the silence outside was unnerving. No wind, no animal sounds, just the weight of the trees pressing in from all sides. I tried reading, but I kept getting distracted by small noises, the kind you can't quite place. A creak in the floorboards, a soft tap against the window. Normal cabin sounds, I told myself. Just the old wood settling, branches shifting in the breeze. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The back door was unlocked. I was sure I hadn't touched it. When I first walked in, I did a quick scan of the place, and I would have noticed if the door had been open. I locked it, checked the windows. Everything was secure. I didn't sleep well. Every little sound woke me up. The shifting of the wood, the distant snap of a twig outside. I lay there in the dark, my ears straining. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps, not an animal. Slow, careful. I held my breath, waiting. The sound stopped. Maybe I imagined it. Morning came, but the unease didn't go away. I went outside, looking for any sign that someone had been near the cabin. The ground was damp from the night air, soft enough to hold tracks. And I saw them, footprints, not mine. They circled the cabin, stopping at the windows, the front door, the back door. Barefoot. The impressions were clear, long toes, deep heel marks. Someone had been here, walking around while I slept. I swallowed hard, scanning the tree line. Nothing, just the endless wall of trees. I told myself it was an old track, maybe another renter from before, but that didn't make sense. The footprints were fresh, the edges still sharp. I should have left then. I should have grabbed my bag, jumped in my truck, and driven until I found a gas station with a working phone. But I didn't, because it still didn't seem real. I tried to shake it off. I spent the morning chopping wood from the small pile outside, letting the physical work distract me. The wind had picked up, rustling through the trees, making the woods feel less dead. By the afternoon, I convinced myself I was overreacting. Then I found the knife. It was wedged into the wooden railing of the back porch, the blade buried deep, the handle sticking out at an angle. I hadn't brought a knife like that, and it definitely hadn't been there before. I stood there, staring at it, my pulse hammering. The handle was smooth, black, like a hunting knife. The blade was long, clean, no rust. Someone had put it there, sometime in the last few hours. The feeling in my gut turned to ice. I turned, scanning the trees again, my skin crawling. Every shadow looked like a figure, every gap between the trunks a hiding place. I grabbed the knife and yanked it free. I wasn't staying here another night. I packed fast, shoving everything into my bag. My truck keys were on the table where I left them. I grabbed them, threw open the front door, and froze. My truck tires were slashed. Deep, precise cuts, not the work of an animal. The knife in my hand felt useless. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Someone was messing with me. Someone was out there watching. I stepped back inside and locked the door. My mind raced. No phone, no way to call for help. The nearest town was at least 15 miles away. I could walk it, but that meant stepping into the woods. And I knew I wasn't alone out here. Night fell too fast. I sat in the living room, the fire burning low. The knife was on the table in front of me. Then the noises started again. Soft at first, scratching against the walls. A slow, deliberate sound. Then the footsteps, pacing, circling. I held my breath, gripping the knife. The fire cast flickering shadows across the room, making everything feel smaller. Then, a knock. Just one. Slow. Hollow. I didn't move. Another knock. Couldn't breathe. Then, from the window, a face, pressed against the glass. Pale, eyes too wide, mouth slightly open. Watching me, I lunged for the light switch. Darkness swallowed the room. I dropped low, heart hammering. Silence. I didn't look at the window again. Didn't move. Didn't breathe. Minutes passed. Then footsteps. Walking away. Then silence. I stayed there all night, gripping the knife. I didn't sleep. Morning came, and the footprints were still there, leading away from the cabin. But they weren't barefoot anymore. They were mine. I left, took my bag, started walking. Fast. Never looked back. After 3 hours, I found a road. A truck stopped for me. I didn't tell the driver what happened, just asked for the nearest town. The cabin owner never answered my calls. When I checked online later, the listing was gone, like it had never been there. I don't go into the woods anymore, and I never stay anywhere without a lock.